The city lights shimmered like tiny stars on the ground as cars lined up outside a grand mansion at the top of a quiet hill. It was the night of the biggest charity gala of the season, hosted by one of the richest men in town, Mr. Richard Hawthorne. People from business, fashion, and politics had been waiting all year for his invitation. Inside, everything sparkled, and the chandeliers, the silver trays, even the smiles of guests who came dressed in diamonds and pride. Inside the mansion, the air was filled with the scent of perfume and the soft hum of laughter. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, holding trays filled with champagne and bite-sized dishes that cost more than a day's wages for most people. Among them was a young woman named Lily. She wasn't part of the world that floated through those golden halls. She was there to work, to earn just enough to pay her rent and cover her mother's medical bills. Lily had been working as a waitress for almost 3 years, moving from one event to another. Tonight's job was supposed to be like any other. She had put her hair up neatly, worn the black and white uniform the catering company provided, and told herself to stay quiet and invisible. That was what she was good at, blending in, smiling politely, and never drawing attention. But as soon as she stepped into that ballroom, she couldn't help but be amazed. The walls were decorated with tall white flowers, soft music played from a string quartet, and a grand piano sat near the stage, shining under the lights. She loved pianos. Even though she hadn't touched one in years, seeing it there stirred something deep inside her. For a moment, she forgot she was there to serve. She just stood still, admiring it from afar. Her moment was cut short when her supervisor whispered sharply, "Lily, table 7 needs refills. Move quickly." She nodded, grabbed her tray, and went back to work. The guests at table 7 were laughing loudly, glasses raised. Among them sat Mr. Hawthorne himself, tall, confident, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. He was surrounded by people who laughed at his every word, even when his jokes weren't funny. Lily noticed how easily he commanded the room. Everyone seemed to look at him with either admiration or fear. He was known not only for his wealth but also for his arrogance. Still, she treated him like any other guest, polite, quiet, and respectful. "More champagne, sir?" she asked softly as she reached his table. Richard barely glanced at her. Yes, of course. And be careful this time. Last year, one of you spilled on my jacket." "Utter disaster," he said with a laugh, making sure everyone at the table heard. The group chuckled. Lily smiled politely, her face calm even though she felt a sting in her chest. She poured his drink slowly and moved on. The night continued in a blur of footsteps and clinking glasses. Lily moved from one end of the hall to the other, balancing trays and dodging guests who never looked where they were going. Every now and then her eyes drifted toward the piano again. A professional pianist was supposed to play later that night, but for now, it sat quietly waiting. During a short break, Lily found a moment to rest in the back corridor near the kitchen. She leaned against the wall and rubbed her sore hands. Another waitress, her friend Maria, joined her. "You okay?" Maria asked, handing her a bottle of water. "Yeah," Lily said with a tired smile. "Just a long night?" Maria laughed. "Tell me about it. These rich folks act like they're on a movie set. I swear one of them asked if the water was artisanal, whatever that means." They both laughed quietly, careful not to be overheard. When Lily returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had grown louder. The guests were getting comfortable, and the conversations turned from polite to boastful. She passed through the tables collecting empty glasses when she overheard one man talking to Richard. "So, Richard, what's next? Another business venture? Or are you buying another car?" Richard smirked. "Oh, maybe both. You know, I like having something new every few months. Keeps life interesting." The table erupted in laughter. Lily shook her head slightly. To her, it all felt like a different universe. One where money bought not just things, but confidence, attention, and sometimes cruelty. She kept moving, staying quiet. But fate has a strange way of bringing people together at unexpected moments. Around an hour later, a guest bumped into her while turning too quickly. The tray in her hands tilted, and one of the glasses spilled a few drops onto Richard's sleeve. Time froze. The chatter around the table died down instantly. Richard looked down at his sleeve, then up at Lily. His eyes narrowed. "Are you serious?" he said, his voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the air. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" Lily's heart pounded. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. I'll get a napkin right away. She reached for the towel tucked at her waist, but he raised his hand to stop her. His lips curled into a smirk. No, let's not ruin the fun. Everyone, look at this, as our waitress decided my suit needed a drink too. The group laughed again, though some did so nervously. Lily froze in embarrassment. Her cheeks burned, but she forced herself to stay calm. I truly apologize, sir, she said softly. Richard leaned back in his chair. You know, he said loudly, I've always wondered, do any of you think these servers have hidden talents? I mean, they spend so much time here watching us live, maybe they dream of being us. He looked directly at Lily. Tell me, do you have any talents, miss? Something other than carrying trays? A few of the guests chuckled. Others looked uncomfortable. Lily swallowed hard. She wanted to disappear, but she knew walking away would make things worse. I used to play the piano, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. That caught Richard's attention. Oh, the piano? He said, raising an eyebrow. How charming. He gestured toward the grand piano across the room. Well, there it is. Why don't you show us then? The words hung in the air like a challenge. A few guests gasped softly. Maria, watching from the side, shook her head slightly, silently telling Lily not to do it. Lily hesitated. Sir, I don't think that would be appropriate, she said carefully. Richard laughed loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Oh, nonsense. What could be more appropriate at a charity gala than a little entertainment? People began to whisper. The room's attention slowly shifted toward them. Lily's stomach turned. She could feel her pulse racing. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not since she left music school after her mother fell ill. The thought of playing in front of these strangers, especially after being mocked, terrified her. But she also knew refusing would only make her seem weak, and she'd already seen that look in Richard's eyes, the kind that said he enjoyed having power over someone. So she took a slow breath and nodded. If that's what you'd like, sir. Richard grinned, leaning back in his chair as if settling in for a show. Wonderful. Let's see what our lovely waitress can do. The crowd parted slightly as Lily walked toward the piano. Her hands felt cold and heavy. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her every step. She wasn't dressed for a stage. Her uniform was plain, her shoes worn. But as she stood before the piano, something inside her shifted. The sight of the polished keys brought back a flood of memories, of her childhood lessons, of her mother humming nearby, of the small upright piano they once had in their old apartment. She sat down carefully and took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered above the keys, uncertain. The chatter behind her began to rise again, people whispering, some giggling. She could hear someone say, "This should be interesting." Another voice added, "Maybe she knows a nursery rhyme." Her chest tightened. She almost stood up to leave, But then she remembered her mother's words, said to her long ago when things were hard. Don't let anyone make you feel small. You were born to create beauty no matter where you are. Lily looked at the keys once more. She didn't plan to play for them. She decided she would play for herself. Her fingers touched the keys softly, pressing the first few notes just to feel the rhythm again. The sound was gentle and unsure, like a whisper. But with each note, her confidence began to grow. She let her eyes close for a second, allowing the music inside her to find its way back. The whispers behind her faded into silence. Even the waiters stopped moving for a moment. The room, filled with luxury and ego just minutes ago, grew still as her quiet notes drifted through the air. Richard watched, his smile faltering just a little. He hadn't expected her to actually play, certainly not like this. Her hands moved with natural grace, as if the piano had been waiting for her all night. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every sound carried emotion, something pure and human that no amount of money could buy. Lily lost track of time. For her, those few moments felt like freedom, a piece of her old self returning after years of silence. When she finally stopped, her hands trembled slightly, but she felt calm. The final note lingered in the air, soft and clear. For a heartbeat, no one said a word. Then Richard clapped slowly. Well, he said with a strained smile, that was unexpected. The guests joined in, some out of politeness, others because they were genuinely moved, though few dared to show it too openly. Lily stood up, bowed her head slightly, and started to walk away quietly. As she passed the tables, she didn't look at Richard. She didn't need his approval. Somewhere deep inside, she knew something had changed. Not for him, but for her. She returned to the service area, her heart still beating fast. Maria rushed up to her, eyes wide. "I didn't know you could play like that," she whispered. Lily smiled softly. "I didn't know I still could." And while the party carried on, louder than ever, there was a subtle shift in the air. People had seen something they didn't expect. Something real in the middle of all that wealth and pride. And though Richard tried to return to his usual charm, a small piece of unease lingered behind his polished grin. He had tried to make a waitress feel small. Instead, he had given her the stage. The soft sound of music still echoed in the air long after the last note faded. Guests slowly returned to their conversations, but the energy in the room had changed. Something quiet and meaningful hung in the air, something no one could quite explain. The woman who had just played the piano wasn't a guest, a celebrity, or a performer. She was just a waitress, or so they had thought. And yet, for a few minutes, she had held the entire room still with nothing more than her touch on the keys. In the kitchen, she was wiping her hands on a towel, pretending to focus on her work. Inside, she was still trembling a little, not from fear, but from the rush of emotion. She couldn't believe she had done it. After so many years of staying silent, she had played again, in front of people she'd never met. She didn't even remember choosing the song. Her fingers had just moved on their own, guided by something deeper than memory. Her friend Maria burst through the swinging door and grabbed her by the arm. "You were amazing," she whispered loudly, her eyes shining. "Do you have any idea what just happened out there?" Lily smiled shyly. "I think I might have caused a scene," she said softly. "A scene?" Maria shook her head. "You made the whole room go silent. Even that smug man at table 7 didn't know what to say. I saw his face. He looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him." Lily laughed quietly, shaking her head. "I wasn't trying to make anyone look bad. I just wanted it to stop. I didn't want to be laughed at." Maria smiled. "Well, you got what you wanted. They're not laughing now." Lily glanced toward the door that led back into the ballroom. She could still hear muffled chatter and clinking glasses. She wasn't sure if she should feel proud or embarrassed. She hadn't played for anyone in years. Not since before her life had changed so drastically. Music had once been her world. It used to be her dream, her way out of small apartments and endless worries. But dreams are fragile things. When her mother got sick, the piano lessons stopped. The rent came first. Now, working events like this had become her normal life. Long hours, tired feet, and polite smiles for people who rarely saw her as more than part of the furniture. She sighed and took a deep breath, forcing herself back into the present. "All right," she said, trying to sound casual. "Break's over. Back to work," Maria grinned. "You might want to stay back here for a bit. People are talking about you." "Talking about me?" Lily frowned. "That's not good," Maria laughed. "Not bad talk. They're curious. Some people are saying you should perform at the next gala. Can you imagine?" Lily rolled her eyes, half smiling. "Let's hope they forget about it by dessert." But not everyone was ready to forget. Out in the main hall, Richard Hawthorne was standing near the bar with a group of his friends. His glass of whiskey rested untouched on the counter. He was staring toward the piano, deep in thought. His usual confidence seemed to have faded. "I didn't expect that," one of his companions said with a chuckle. "You really thought she'd be terrible, didn't you?" Richard gave a half smile. "I thought she'd be nervous. That's all." "Instead, she made you look nervous," another man teased. "That girl has talent. Real talent. You should see if she'd perform at your next event." Richard didn't answer right away. His pride was smarting. He wasn't used to being surprised, especially not by someone serving drinks. He had built his entire reputation on control, on knowing how to read people, how to stay one step ahead. But that young woman had caught him off guard completely. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Talent doesn't change what she is. She's staff, not a performer." The others exchanged looks, realizing the topic was sensitive. One of them quickly changed the subject, and they drifted away to mingle with other guests. But Richard stayed where he was, still looking at the piano. He couldn't shake the image of her sitting there, playing with her eyes closed. Lost in the music as if nothing else existed. He didn't like that feeling, being humbled. Later, when the party began to wind down, the guests started leaving one by one. Chauffeurs lined up at the entrance, and the sound of engines filled the night. Lily and the rest of the staff began clearing tables and gathering empty glasses. The once perfect hall now looked messy, full of half-eaten desserts and forgotten coats. As she carried a tray back to the kitchen, she noticed Richard standing by the doorway, talking to one of the event planners. She tried to walk past quietly, hoping not to draw attention, but just as she was about to slip by, he turned and spoke. "You," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Come here a moment." Lily stopped, unsure if she'd done something wrong. She stepped forward carefully, setting the tray down on a nearby table. "Yes, sir?" He studied her for a moment before speaking. "That was quite a surprise earlier. You play well." "Thank you," she said softly. "Where did you learn?" "My mother taught me," she replied. "And later I took lessons at a community music school." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Interesting. Do you still play often?" "Not really," she said. "I don't have a piano anymore." There was a brief silence. The sound of cleaners moving in the background filled the gap. Then Richard said, almost casually, "You handled yourself well. Most people would have refused." "I admire that." Lily didn't quite know how to respond. It sounded like a compliment, but something in his tone made her uneasy, as if he was still trying to figure out whether she had embarrassed him or impressed him. "Thank you." "Sir," she said again, keeping her voice polite and neutral. He nodded once more, then turned back to his conversation. That was it. No apology, no further acknowledgement. Just a few words meant to remind her of her place. Lily walked away, feeling a strange mix of relief and frustration. She had expected him to be angry, maybe even to scold her, but his calm, detached tone felt almost worse. It was as if he had already filed the entire incident away in his mind, just another story to tell at his next party. Still, she told herself it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had faced the moment and walked away with her dignity intact. That was enough. When the event finally ended, it was nearly 2 a.m. The cleaning crew took over while the staff packed up the catering equipment. Lily changed out of her uniform, slipped into her worn jacket, and stepped outside. The night air was cold and refreshing after hours inside the crowded ballroom. As she waited for her bus, she thought about what had happened. She didn't know if she'd ever see any of those people again, and honestly, she hoped she wouldn't. But a small part of her couldn't stop replaying the music in her head, the feeling of her fingers on the keys, the hush of the crowd. It reminded her of who she used to be. On the bus ride home, the city lights blurred past the window. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maria. "Girl, you were the highlight of the night. Everyone's still talking about it. Even the event manager asked for your name." Lily smiled faintly and typed back, "Thanks. I just hope it doesn't cause trouble." Maria replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "Trouble? More like opportunity." Lily didn't answer right away. Opportunity was something she'd stopped believing in long ago. Still, as the bus rumbled through the quiet streets, she caught herself humming softly, the same tune she had played earlier. The next morning, she woke to a message from her supervisor. Her first thought was that she'd done something wrong, but instead the message simply said, "Good work last night." The client was impressed. "You're on the list for next week's event," she smiled. Maybe things weren't as bad as she'd feared. Meanwhile, across town, Richard sat in his study with a cup of coffee, scrolling through photos from the event. His assistant had sent him the press shots, pictures of smiling guests, expensive decorations, and him shaking hands with donors. But then he paused on one image, a candid photo of Lily at the piano. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was lost in the music, her face calm and focused. He stared at it for a long time. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because it reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years: authenticity. For most of his life, Richard had surrounded himself with people who wanted something from him. Investors, socialites, reporters, everyone wanted to be part of his world. But that woman had walked into his event as a nobody and managed to change the atmosphere with nothing but her heart and talent. He put down the phone and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in a long while, he felt curious, not about profits or deals, but about a person. The next few days passed quietly. Lily went back to her routine: morning chores, long shifts, and quick dinners. But something inside her had changed. The more she thought about that night, the more she realized she missed playing, not for fame or money, but for the peace it brought her. On her day off, she visited a small park downtown where an old public piano sat near a fountain. The keys were worn, a few even chipped, but the sound was still sweet. She sat down, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and began to play. Children nearby stopped running for a moment to listen. A couple walking past smiled. It was simple, quiet, and beautiful. She didn't know it yet, but that small moment would be the start of something new, a path that would slowly bring her back to the life she once dreamed of. And miles away, in his high-rise office, Richard was making a call. He had asked his assistant to find out more about the waitress from the gala, the one who played the piano. "Just curiosity," he said when questioned. "I want to know where she learned." But deep down he knew it was more than curiosity. Something about that night had unsettled him, stirred something he didn't understand. He had all the money in the world, yet for a few minutes, someone without any had managed to hold power in the room. Real, genuine power that came from the heart. And for the first time in his life, Richard Hawthorne wondered what it felt like to be truly moved by something money couldn't buy. The days after the gala passed quietly, but neither of them could stop thinking about that night. The night a waitress sat down at a grand piano and changed the mood of an entire room. For Lily, life returned to normal, or at least that's what she told herself. She still woke up before sunrise, made coffee in her tiny apartment, and took 2 buses to get to work. The money she earned barely covered rent and her mother's medicine, but she didn't complain. She had grown used to simple things, warm soup, quiet evenings, and short moments of peace that came from knowing she was doing her best. Still, something inside her had shifted. Whenever she walked past a music shop or heard piano notes from a cafe, she slowed down without realizing it. That night at the gala had reminded her of something she had buried years ago, the part of herself that dreamed. She tried to ignore it at first. Dreaming felt dangerous, like opening a door to disappointment. But late at night, when her mother was asleep and the city outside had gone quiet, she would find herself tapping her fingers on the table, playing invisible keys. One afternoon, she passed by the same park where she had played on her day off. The public piano was still there, its paint peeling and a few keys out of tune. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down. She placed her hands gently on the keys and began to play. At first, it was just for herself, soft, familiar melodies that only she knew. But slowly people started to notice. A little boy stopped with his ice cream, staring in awe. An older woman sat on a nearby bench, smiling as she listened. Even a few teenagers who had been scrolling on their phones looked up and clapped quietly when she finished. Lily smiled, a little embarrassed, but also deeply happy. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as someone struggling to get by, but as herself. What she didn't know was that someone else had noticed her too. Across town, in a high-rise office filled with glass walls and the faint hum of computers, Richard Hawthorne sat at his desk. The city stretched out below him like a sea of lights. He wasn't the type of man who wasted time thinking about people who worked for him. But lately, his thoughts had been distracted. The image of the waitress at the piano kept coming back. There had been something about the way she played, and something honest, raw, and pure. He had attended hundreds of events, heard famous musicians perform at his parties, but none of them had made him feel what she did in that short moment. At first, he tried to dismiss it. He told himself it was just curiosity, maybe guilt for embarrassing her in front of everyone. But the feeling wouldn't go away. He finally called his assistant. "Can you find out the name of the young woman who worked the last gala, the one who played the piano?" The assistant looked surprised. "You mean one of the catering staff?" "Yes," Richard said. "The one who played." A day later, he had her name and a short summary of her background. Nothing fancy, just that she worked part-time for the catering company, lived in a modest neighborhood, and had once studied music before leaving school. Richard sat in silence after reading the report. It confirmed what he had guessed, that her talent came from something real, not from wealth or opportunity, but from hard work and heart. That evening, he drove himself, something he rarely did, to the same park listed in her address file. He told no one where he was going. He parked his car across the street and walked through the park quietly. hands in his coat pockets, and there she was. Lily sat at the old public piano again, playing softly while a few people stood around listening. She didn't notice him at first. Her eyes were closed, lost in the music. He stayed back watching. There was no stage, no luxury, no spotlight, just her and the piano. When she finished, a few people clapped. She smiled shyly and thanked them before standing to leave. That's when she noticed him. Their eyes met briefly and her smile faded. She hesitated, unsure if she should pretend she didn't see him. But he stepped forward politely. "You play beautifully," he said. She blinked, still surprised. "Mr. Hawthorne?" He nodded slightly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just walking by." Lily didn't believe that for a second, but she stayed polite. "Thank you, sir. It's just something I do when I have time." "I can see that," he said, looking at the piano. "You make it sound new again." She smiled a little. "It's an old piano, but it still has life. Just needs someone to care about it." He studied her face quietly for a moment. She seemed calm, not intimidated, not angry, just herself. That alone intrigued him. "I was thinking," he said after a pause, "I might need a pianist for an upcoming charity event. Would you be interested?" Lily blinked in surprise. "A pianist?" "Yes, I could hire a professional, of course, but I'd rather give someone talented a real chance." "You're good. Very good," she hesitated. The offer sounded too generous, too sudden. "I appreciate that, but I'm not a performer. I haven't played seriously in years." "Maybe it's time you started again," he said, his tone gentle but firm. Lily looked at the ground, unsure how to respond. She didn't trust easily, especially not rich men who thought they could fix things with money. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I ask," he said. He handed her a small card with his office number. "If you decide, call me." Then he nodded politely and left, leaving her standing by the piano, confused and curious. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. It didn't make sense. Why would a man like him care whether she played again? She knew better than to believe people acted out of kindness without reason. But at the same time, she remembered how his tone had changed. He hadn't sounded arrogant or mocking this time, just sincere. When she told her mother about it later, her mother smiled softly. "Maybe he saw something in you," she said. "Maybe it's time the world did too." Lily frowned. "I'm not sure. I don't even have the clothes for a real performance, let alone the courage." Her mother chuckled. "Courage is the one thing you already have. You proved that the night you sat at that piano." The next morning, Lily picked up her phone more than once to call the number, but each time she stopped. She didn't want to look desperate or foolish. What if he was just being polite? What if he didn't even remember the offer? But by the third day, something inside her told her to take the chance. She dialed the number. A calm voice answered, "Mr. Hawthorne's office." "Hello," Lily said nervously. "This is the waitress from the charity gala. He told me to call about the piano." There was a pause. Then the assistant replied, "Yes, of course. He's expecting your call. Can you come by the office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Lily almost dropped the phone. "Expecting my call?" "Yes, he mentioned it yesterday." When the call ended, she just sat there for a long moment, staring at her phone. It didn't feel real. The next morning, she put on her cleanest outfit, a simple white blouse and dark skirt, and took the bus downtown. The building was tall and shiny, nothing like the places she usually went. When she stepped inside, the marble floors gleamed under bright lights. She felt small, but she straightened her shoulders and reminded herself that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. The receptionist greeted her politely and led her to an elevator. When the doors opened on the top floor, she saw large glass windows overlooking the city. Richard was standing near one of them, looking out. "Come in," he said without turning around. "I'm glad you called." "Thank you for inviting me," she said quietly. He motioned for her to sit. "I've arranged for another event next month. It's smaller than the gala, a fundraiser for local schools. I'd like you to play for about 20 minutes during dinner." Lily's eyes widened. 20 minutes? That's a lot. "You can choose the music," he said. "And of course you'll be paid fairly." She hesitated again. "Why me, though? There are plenty of trained musicians." He smiled faintly. "Because most trained musicians play for applause. You play because you love it. People can feel the difference." His words surprised her. She looked at him closely, trying to understand. He didn't look like the arrogant man she'd met at the gala. There was something softer in his eyes and maybe respect. Finally, she nodded. All right, I'll do it. Good, he said, his smile growing. You won't regret it. As she left the office, she felt a mix of fear and excitement. For the first time in years, she had something to look forward to, a reason to practice again. That night, she stayed up late watching old piano videos online, remembering techniques she'd long forgotten. Her fingers were stiff, but the music came back slowly, like an old friend finding its way home. In the weeks that followed, she practiced every chance she got. After her shifts, she would sneak into the community center near her neighborhood, where an old piano sat unused. The janitor there, a kind old man, would let her in after hours. Each night, the sound of her music filled the empty hall, echoing softly through the walls. She practiced until her fingers ached, until she could play without thinking. And as the day of the event drew closer, she realized something strange. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. Meanwhile, Richard kept tabs quietly from his end. He told no one what he was planning. The fundraiser wasn't just another show for him anymore. He wanted to see if what he'd felt that night, the honesty in her music, when it was real or just his imagination. As the night approached, both of them, in their own ways, prepared for something neither of them fully understood. For her, it was a second chance at the dream she thought she'd lost. For him, it was the beginning of seeing the world through different eyes, and though neither knew it yet, that night would once again bring the two of them face to face and change them both forever. The night of the fundraiser arrived sooner than she expected. The past few weeks had passed in a blur of work, practice, and sleepless nights. Every spare minute she had, she spent at the community center's piano, repeating the same songs until her fingers remembered each note by heart. When the big day came, she woke before sunrise, too nervous to eat breakfast. Her small apartment felt even smaller that morning. Her mother watched her from the kitchen table, smiling softly. "You'll do fine," her mother said gently. "You've already done the hard part, believing in yourself again." Lily tried to smile back. "I hope so." Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. "Don't just play for them. Play for yourself. That's what people feel when they listen to you. They feel your heart." Those words stayed with her all day. By the time evening came, the city glowed under golden lights. The event was being held at a smaller but equally elegant venue, a private hall lined with flowers and candles. It wasn't as grand as the mansion from the last gala, but it had its own quiet charm. The guests were mostly teachers, donors, and a few business figures, people who wanted to support local education. When she arrived, dressed simply in a long, dark dress borrowed from a friend, she felt out of place again for a moment, but this time the feeling didn't scare her. She reminded herself that she wasn't here to serve. She was here to play. Richard was already there, greeting guests near the entrance. When he saw her, his eyes lit up with a mix of recognition and quiet pride. "I'm glad you came," he said warmly. "You look ready," she nodded, trying to calm her nerves. "A little nervous, but yes. Thank you for the opportunity. You earned it," he said. "Everyone deserves a moment to be heard." His words surprised her. She realized then that something about him really had changed. The arrogance she had once seen in his eyes seemed softer now, replaced by genuine kindness. As the guests settled into their seats and dinner began, the soft buzz of conversation filled the room. The lights dimmed slightly and the host introduced the evening's program. A short speech, a few performances, and then the music. When it was time, the host smiled and said, "Tonight, we have a special guest, a young woman whose music reminds us all that talent can be found anywhere if we take the time to listen." The guests applauded politely as she walked to the stage. Her steps were steady, though her heart was pounding. She sat down at the piano, took a slow breath, and looked out at the faces watching her. For a moment, she caught Richard's eyes across the room. He gave a small nod as if to say, "You've got this." And then, she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. She started with a gentle melody, a piece she had written herself years ago but never shared with anyone. As her hands moved, her nerves faded away. The music carried her. Each note was a memory, each chord a feeling she had kept buried for too long. The room grew still. People stopped eating, forks suspended halfway to their mouths. Conversations faded. Even the waiters froze in place for a moment. The sound of her music filled every corner of the hall. Warm, honest and full of quiet power. Halfway through, she shifted into a more emotional piece, one that spoke of loss and hope. Her fingers danced over the keys with confidence now. It wasn't just a performance. It was a story, her story. By the time the last note faded, the silence in the room was almost sacred. Then came the applause, loud, sincere, and filled with admiration. Some people even stood up, clapping until their hands hurt. Lily stood slowly, her eyes wide in disbelief. She hadn't expected this reaction. She bowed her head slightly, smiling through tears she hadn't realized were there. As she walked off the stage, Richard met her near the side of the room. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "You moved everyone in there, including me." She laughed nervously. "Thank you. I'm just glad I didn't mess up." He shook his head. "You didn't just play the piano. You made people feel something real. That's rare." Before she could answer, several guests came up to her, eager to speak. One was a woman from a local arts foundation. "Your performance was stunning," the woman said warmly. "Do you perform often?" "Not really," Lily said shyly. "This was my first time in years." "Well, I hope it's not your last," the woman said. "We have a charity concert next month." "I'd love for you to play." Lily blinked in surprise. "Really? I'd be honored." The woman handed her a business card. "Call me tomorrow. We'll talk details." As the woman left, another man, a teacher from one of the schools being supported, came up to her with a smile. "You reminded me why I started teaching music," he said. "Thank you." For the first time in years, Lily felt like her music meant something again, not just to her, but to others. When the evening finally ended, she helped the staff tidy up, an old habit she couldn't shake. Richard found her stacking chairs quietly in a corner. "You don't have to do that," he said, amused. She smiled. Force of habit. Old habits die hard. He watched her for a moment before saying, "You know, the first night we met, I thought I was teaching you a lesson about humility. Turns out you taught me one instead." She looked up surprised. "What do you mean?" he sighed. "That night at the gala, I wanted to be the center of attention. I thought power came from being above others. But when you played, you showed everyone that real strength comes from grace and from staying true to yourself. I haven't stopped thinking about it since." His words were sincere, and for a brief moment, she saw the man behind the reputation, not the millionaire or the host, but a person trying to understand himself. "Maybe we both learned something that night," she said quietly. He smiled. "Maybe we did." They stood in silence for a moment, the soft hum of cleaning staff around them. Then he said, "I want to help you, not out of pity, but because you deserve a chance. If you ever need a piano, a space to practice anything, consider it done." She hesitated. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to take advantage." "It's not taking advantage," he said gently. "It's accepting what you've earned." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Thank you." As she left that night, she felt lighter than she had in years. The air outside was cool, and the city lights shimmered like music notes scattered across the sky. She knew this was just the beginning, not of fame or fortune, but of something more important, a chance to start over. Over the next few weeks, her life began to change. The woman from the foundation kept her word, and soon Lily was invited to perform at another event. This time she didn't feel out of place. She prepared with excitement instead of fear. She began spending her evenings at a small piano studio Richard had arranged for her to use. It was quiet and warm, with a single window overlooking the city. She practiced for hours, sometimes losing track of time. Richard stopped by a few times, not as a boss but as a friend. He would sit in the back listening quietly. Sometimes he asked questions about the music, sometimes he just listened in silence. Slowly, an unlikely friendship grew between them, built not on wealth or status, but on respect. He told her about his life, how he had worked his way up, how success had made him lonely, how he had lost sight of the things that truly mattered. She listened, not judging, just listening. And she told him about her mother, her struggles, her lost dreams. He listened too, really listened, and for the first time in a long while she felt heard. One evening, as she finished playing a song, he said quietly, "You know, you've changed the way I look at things." She laughed softly. "How so?" "I used to think money solved everything," he said. "But you can't buy what you have. You can't buy heart." She smiled, not sure what to say. He continued, "You remind me that life isn't about showing off. It's about feeling something real. Thank you for reminding me of that, her eyes softened. I think we all just need someone to remind us sometimes. They sat in silence for a while after that, the piano still echoing faintly between them. The night of her second performance came and went, and it was even more successful than the first. Word began to spread about the waitress pianist who had captured hearts with her pure emotional playing. She was invited to more events, slowly gaining recognition. Each time she played, she thought of where she had started, the long nights, the doubts, and that first moment of courage when she sat at the piano in front of a room full of strangers. And somewhere in that journey, Richard found himself changing too. The people around him noticed, his friends, his staff, even his investors. He smiled more, spoke more kindly, and seemed more grounded than ever before. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew the reason. That one moment of humility, that one act of kindness he didn't intend, had opened his eyes. Months passed, and Lily's life looked completely different now. She still worked sometimes to help her mother, but she was no longer just another face in the crowd. She had rediscovered her purpose, and though her journey wasn't finished, she had learned something important, that even the smallest act of courage can change the course of a life. As for Richard, he learned that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected people. Both had started in the same room, one full of pride, the other full of fear. But they left it with something neither had before: understanding. And as the sound of her piano carried through the city one evening, reaching even the quietest streets, it was clear to anyone who listened, this was more than music. It was a story of grace, second chances, and the quiet power of kindness. The morning light spilled through the window of the small piano studio, where she spent most of her time now. Dust floated like tiny stars in the sunlight, and the quiet hum of the city outside mixed softly with the echoes of yesterday's music. She sat at the piano, fingers resting lightly on the keys, lost in thought. It had been almost a year since that unforgettable night at the Millionaire's mansion, the night that had changed everything. Back then, she was just a waitress trying to survive, working long hours and dreaming silently of the music she once loved. Now her life looked completely different. She still worked hard, but her days were filled with purpose. Her music had taken her places she never imagined she'd go. She smiled faintly, remembering how nervous she had been that first time she played in front of all those people. The memory was still vivid. The hush in the room, the sound of her trembling fingers finding courage one note at a time, and the way everything changed once she started playing. After that night, everything unfolded like a dream she didn't dare wake up from. The invitations began to come in, and small concerts, charity events, local shows. She was no longer the girl people ignored as she passed through the crowd with a tray of glasses. People now waited to hear her play, but what mattered most to her wasn't the attention or applause. It was how her music made people feel. After every performance, strangers would come up to her, telling her how her music reminded them of something: a lost dream, a loved one, a time when life felt simpler. Hearing those stories always filled her heart. That was what she wanted her music to do: connect hearts. Still, success came with its own kind of pressure. Some days she doubted herself, wondering if she really deserved all of this. But then she'd think of her mother's words: play for yourself, not for them. And she'd sit at the piano and let her heart speak again. Her mother's health had improved too. With the money she earned from performances, she managed to get her mother better treatment and move her into a small but cozy apartment closer to the park. They'd often sit by the window together, her mother listening as she practiced, smiling proudly. One afternoon, as she packed her sheet music for another charity concert, she received a call that brought back old memories. It was from Richard. "Still busy changing the world with your music?" he said lightly when she picked up. She laughed. "I'm trying my best. How are you?" "Good," he said. "Actually, better than good. I've been thinking, we're organizing another gala next month. This time I want to do it differently. I want it to be less about wealth and more about giving real talent a stage. Would you be interested in being part of it?" She hesitated for a moment, surprised. "You mean, play again?" "Yes," he said. "But not just that. I want you to help me plan it. You have an eye for what touches people. I think together we could make something special." The thought made her heart flutter. That same mansion, the place where her humiliation had almost begun, now becoming the place where she could help others shine. "I'd love to," she said softly. The weeks leading up to the event were busy. This time she wasn't just a performer. She helped organize everything, from choosing young local musicians to selecting songs that told stories of hope and resilience. She wanted the night to feel different, not about status or glamour, but about shared humanity. Richard, true to his word, had changed. He was no longer the man who sought attention. He spent more time listening, asking questions, and helping others find their voice. The people who worked with him noticed the change too. They respected him now not because of his money, but because of his humility. On the evening of the event, as she arrived at the grand hall, she paused at the entrance for a moment. The chandeliers still sparkled like before, and the guests still wore elegant clothes, but the atmosphere felt warmer, more genuine. The walls that once echoed with shallow laughter now carried a sense of purpose. Richard met her near the stage, smiling. "You nervous?" "Not this time," she said. "I'm just excited," he nodded. "Good, tonight isn't about showing off. It's about connection, and you're the reason I learned that." She looked around the room filled with people from all walks of life, some wealthy, some not, some musicians just starting out. "It's amazing how much has changed," she said. He smiled. "Thanks to you." She shook her head gently. "No, thanks to a lesson we both learned." When it was her turn to play, she didn't walk to the piano with hesitation anymore. She walked with quiet confidence. As she sat down, she could feel hundreds of eyes watching, but instead of fear, she felt peace. She began with a new piece she had written herself, something simple but full of emotion. The melody rose and fell like a conversation between heartbeats. It spoke of the past year, of challenges, growth, and gratitude. As she played, she glanced across the room and saw faces moved by the sound. People smiling, others wiping away quiet tears. Even Richard, standing in the back, looked deeply touched. Her music filled the hall like sunlight through stained glass, warm, soft, and full of color. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause once again. But this time she didn't bow out of disbelief. She smiled calmly, knowing what she had given was honest and real. After her performance, several young musicians approached her. One shy boy, no older than 15, looked at her with wide eyes. "Your music makes me want to play again," he said. "I stopped because people told me I wasn't good enough." She smiled kindly. "Then play for yourself. Don't let anyone decide what's good enough for your heart." His face lit up, and she realized that maybe that was the whole purpose, to pass on what she had learned. Later that evening, as the guests mingled, Richard raised his glass to make a toast. "Tonight," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "we celebrate not wealth or power, but passion, the kind that comes from within. A year ago, I made a mistake. I tried to make someone feel small so that I could feel important. That moment taught me the most important lesson of my life. Greatness isn't about what you have, but what you give." The room fell silent, everyone listening. He looked toward her and smiled. "And I owe that lesson to someone who showed grace when she had every reason not to. To her, and to every person out there with a dream, this night is for you." Applause filled the room again, louder than before. But this time it wasn't for a performance. It was for understanding, for growth, for the shared humanity that bound everyone together. Weeks passed after that night, but the memory of it stayed with her. Opportunities continued to come, but she didn't let success change her. She still taught free piano lessons at the community center every weekend, helping children who couldn't afford private lessons. One day, while teaching, she noticed a young girl sitting in the corner, watching quietly but not participating. She walked over and smiled. "Would you like to try?" The girl shook her head shyly. "I don't know how." "That's all right," she said gently, sitting beside her. "Everyone starts not knowing how. All you have to do is try." The girl hesitated, then placed her small fingers on the keys. The sound was awkward at first, uneven, hesitant. But she smiled anyway. "That's perfect," she said. "See? You're already playing." The girl laughed, and for a moment she saw her younger self reflected in that innocent joy. Meanwhile, Richard continued his journey of change. The media began to notice his transformation, how his company shifted focus towards social causes, scholarships, and community work. When people asked what inspired him, he always gave the same answer. A waitress taught me what wealth really means, he'd say simply. But he didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it felt right. Sometimes he would visit her performances quietly, sitting in the back row where no one noticed him. Watching her play always brought him peace, a reminder of how far both of them had come. A few months later, she was invited to perform at a large national event. It was her biggest stage yet. Before stepping onto the stage, she stood backstage for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she sat at the piano and the lights dimmed, she closed her eyes and smiled. She thought of her mother, the community center, the boy who wanted to play again, and the man who had once tried to humiliate her but instead became one of her greatest supporters. And when she began to play, her music carried all of it, every emotion, every memory, every bit of grace she had learned. By the time she finished, the audience was on its feet cheering. But she didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. She felt content. She bowed, smiled, and whispered softly to herself, "This is where I was meant to be." In the years that followed, she continued to play, teach, and inspire. Her story spread across the world, not as a tale of revenge or triumph, but as one of kindness, resilience, and unexpected friendship. People didn't remember her just as the waitress who played the piano at a rich man's party. They remembered her as the woman who taught the world a quiet truth, that dignity cannot be taken, that talent can come from anywhere, and that even the smallest act of grace can change a heart forever. And somewhere in a quiet corner of the city, she could still be found most mornings, sitting at her piano, sunlight warming her face, fingers moving gently over the keys. Because no matter how far she went, she never forgot what truly mattered. Not the fame, not the applause won, but the music itself. The music that had saved her, humbled another, and brought two very different souls together in the most unexpected way. The story of the waitress and the millionaire would live on, not as a tale of pride and punishment, but as a song. A soft, beautiful melody about second chances, compassion, and the incredible power of simply believing in someone when no one else does.